Well, hello everybody, and welcome on this sunny, beautiful summer afternoon here to this segment of Tech Beat, where leaders learn, innovate, and grow. I'm super excited to welcome my friend and guest, Josh Weber here from Big Red Jelly. Josh and I are going to get into a discussion here in a minute, and I'm going to officially introduce him. But before I do that, quickly, I just wanted to make everybody aware that Josh and I will be keeping an eye on questions and comments. So whatever platform you're joining us on, feel free to use the comments section there to ask questions or to add comments. We will get to those as it makes sense throughout this hour. We may save some towards the end. I do want to remind everybody we will have an open Q&A session at the end of the at the end of this segment, and you're more than welcome to ask any questions that you want of Josh and I in that time period. Questions on entrepreneurship or leadership or sales and marketing or operations, finance, whatever. We certainly won't have the answers for everything, and they may not be the right answers, but we'll do our best. Let's see. My name is Earl Foote. I am founder CEO of Nexus IT. We are a 22-year-old outsourced white glove IT support and cybersecurity services firm based here in northern Utah, and servicing a Utah and nationwide footprint. By way of announcement, just keep in mind that we have some more of these segments coming up. Look out for those announcements. I'll be joined over the next few weeks by Christy Holt, who is the founder CEO of Vibonics. Very engaging, interesting gal, and has a lot of experience that, a lot of really valuable information to bring to the table. And my friend Stephanie Page will be joining us as well in the coming weeks. So let's get to the guest of the hour and the topic at hand. My guest here, again, Josh Weber. Josh studied at both BYU and University of Utah. If you are a Utah native or live here, you know that that's not exactly super common, and it's a kind of a feud within yourself that you have to figure out there to do that. You'll have to tell us more about that, Josh. But Josh eventually graduated with his degree in business administration and French. After working for several digital marketing and branding agencies, Josh always knew he wanted to launch a team of his own. That's where Big Red Jelly came into play, where Josh has built a team that brings together human creativity with powerful digital tools to help businesses of all sizes better scale and grow. Big Red Jelly is growing now faster than ever, niching down and pivoting significantly during the COVID-19 pandemic. The team is more refined and moving forward. Big Red Jelly is now reaching its 4th year mark and showing no signs of slowing down. Josh invites anyone listening to him to send him a quick email or text and come join him for some canyoneering or whitewater rafting this summer. So, Josh, you're an adventurous guy. I know we're going to talk a little bit more about your COVID pivot this hour, which is going to be a ton of fun. I always like to get to know my guests and let the audience get to know my guests a little bit more. So tell us a little bit about you, Josh. Where did you grow up? What kind of things were you into as a kid? What's been your journey to land you where you are now, at this moment in life?
Sure. Thanks, Earl. Excited to be here. So, what's my background? What's my story? I was born in New Zealand, actually, so that might pique some people's interest. My dad is a Kiwi, as they will say. He's born and raised in New Zealand. My mom is from Washington. They met in Utah, but moved back to New Zealand, where my brothers and I were born. So rugby's been just a huge kind of foundation of our family culture, for those who are familiar with New Zealand and their sports, most notably the All Blacks, I would say. And eventually, I was really young when we moved to Utah. I was about 7 years old. And so I do consider myself a Utahn. thus my love for the outdoors, hiking, rafting. That's kind of what I did growing up for a long time. I played rugby as well throughout high school. I played at BYU, and then I played for the University of Utah, which was interesting. If people want to see an interesting image, they can go to my Facebook, and my cover image is a photo of my younger brother, who's 2 years younger, Zach, playing at BYU, and me playing at the University of Utah. And some photographer on the sideline managed to just snap a photo of us, our face looking right at each other. But the difference was that I had a bit of scruff, and he just had the mustache, just based on BYU. So, that was fun. Growing up was just a blast. I love Utah. It fit my personality perfectly. But then, as I went through college, I started to become more and more attached to marketing. I just loved everything about what marketing had to offer, and specifically digital marketing. And so over time, I learned more and more. And ever since I graduated, I've been in that field. So I've been in digital marketing ever since. And then we launched Big Red Jelly a little under 4 years ago. So that leads us up to where we are currently. Yeah. So
super cool, man. Super cool. So canyoneering, that's no joke. Like, people, know what canyoneering is. And I've done a bit myself. Certainly, I would not call myself an expert, and I wouldn't go on a canyoneering expedition by myself, particularly in a more, complicated canyon. But it's pretty intense. I don't know if you've seen kayakineering. The guys that are doing canyoneering, but they're backpacking a kayak in, and then doing running water in slot canyons, and even if there's waterfalls and cascades and stuff, I mean, they're just going down it all. So it's kind of nutty stuff. But how did you get into canyoneering?
Yeah, I'm still relatively a novice, I would say. My brothers and I started getting into it a little over probably 3 years ago. And look, to be honest, I just regret not doing it sooner. A lot of people in Utah don't realize just how much stuff there is to explore, particularly in southeastern Utah for canyoneering, right? So there's the classics, Zion National Park, Canyonlands, people go to Moab, but what a lot of people don't know is that there's thousands, even tens of thousands of slot canyons that can be explored, most of which have been, mapped out and actually have names and routes and anchors for you to rappel off of, right? I enjoy canyoneering because I don't have to go uphill most of the time. So, people ask, well, do you rock climb? I'm like, no, I do not rock climb. So it's easier, at least in terms of cardio. And B, it's exciting to explore a new slot canyon if you're with the right people, right? You have the right gear. You can't be too claustrophobic. I'm a little bit claustrophobic, and it can get you into those kind of anxious situations. There was one we visited last spring where we got to a pretty tight corridor. It was only about 30 yards long, but in order to get through this corridor, you have to kind of breathe out and then shuffle along, and then breathe in when you reach a gap, and then breathe out. And if you breathe in at the wrong spot and you feel that rock wall on both sides, that can lead to a little bit of a panic situation. So it's always fun to see people's kind of Achilles heel. Some people it's heights, some people it's claustrophobia. But slot canyons is a little bit of everything. So that's why I like it. It's cool.
It is a lot of fun. I I love slot canyons. They're absolutely fascinating, right? Have you done Neon, by the way? Have you
Which
done
one?
Neon Canyon? Neon Canyon?
I have not. No. Neon.
Not either. But it's above my pay grade at the moment. But I know several friends have mentioned it as a really, really amazing, trip. So that's one that you should look into. And I need to maybe train up a little bit and go do that one. Be cool. We should organize something, but back to the, it's good to get to know you, personally, obviously, but back to the matter at hand. So, we're going to talk a little bit today about focusing on processes and attractors, and how that particularly, in times of COVID, in times of crisis, has really, helped you and your business find your jam and really begin to scale. So maybe before we go there, just tell us a little bit about what Big Red Jelly is, what you do, what your specialties are, what type of businesses you serve, that kind of stuff.
Yeah. So like you mentioned, we will talk about kind of our evolution, especially over the last year. But right now, Big Red Jelly focuses on branding and digital building, as we like to say. So kind of those early steps of a rebrand or remarketing or new business, where we won't do the digital marketing and advertising. We have partners who will do that. But we have niched down to really focus on combining human creativity with powerful online tools to really help businesses do better business online. So a lot of companies, both startup all the way to enterprise, will come to us if they need to rebrand, they need to get to that next level, they're remarketing, or they're just kind of changing who they're trying to target. We will first kind of rebrand their company in a way that is going to be more effective. And then we ultimately help make sure that they're getting the most out of their online tools and platforms. This usually centers around a website, but we also help in a lot of CRM integration, marketing automation, online scheduling, e-commerce, you name it. So we have a lot of great, really talented experts who specialize in those two areas, notably branding and online building or digital platform building. So.
Yeah, very cool. I know offline, you and I were having a quick discussion, and you guys are growing at a nice clip. Having hired several new people recently, and have more hires slated for the summer. Which, for a digital marketing agency at 4 years in, it's not easy to be where you're at right now. Like, you guys have done an appreciable job, to grow your team size to a decent size, and obviously grow a nice book of business. So any entrepreneur in our journey, we go through these processes of refining who we are as people, who we are as an organization, what our product and services are, where we really shine. And I think, COVID was really the perfect opportunity, whether you wanted it or not, to get to do some really deep introspective work and really force yourself to kind of figure those things out. The other interesting thing here is that I know from personal experience or personal contacts, a lot of marketing firms struggled during COVID. A lot of marketing firms lost a lot of business. I know that some clients of ours who are marketers, marketing firms, struggled, significantly during COVID, or have struggled, significantly over the last year and a half. You, however, seem to figure out your lane early on in this. So let's talk a little bit about that. What did COVID do to your business, and how did you turn the lemons into lemonade? Yeah,
great question. So, a lot of people here, especially in the agency space and specifically the digital marketing agency space, but the importance of niching down, right? It's almost become kind of cliche, but I have an interesting perspective on this process. So pre-COVID, we were a full service digital marketing and advertising agency. Although for about a year prior, we had been toying with the idea of niching down to what we've always been best at and known for. And that was branding and building, right? So that was doing those first two kind of integral steps to taking a business to a next level and helping them grow. COVID hit, and for us, it really had an impact, I would say, early March. I think mid-March maybe is more accurate. But in a space of 2 weeks, we had a third of our clientele pause work. We are the type of agency where we weren't going to kind of revisit the fine print in our statements of work or anything like that. These are restaurants, these are salon owners, these are attorneys, chiropractors, event managers. I mean, my gosh, I still, count my blessings that we're luckily in an industry that was able to be semi-agile during this period. But, that for them having to close their doors completely, zero revenue, we essentially had to pause all of our services. And so in a matter of 2 weeks, a third of our revenue disappeared. Right. So
that's big, man. That's big.
Yeah. Yeah. But for us, it was, well, now is the chance to stop being apprehensive about this pivot, about niching down. And now we have less to lose than ever before. So why the heck not go forward? And that led to a lot of great conversations that we started having with our co-founders and our team. But we started to put data behind our hunches, right? On, well, are we really known for branding and building? We talked to a lot of our clients, et cetera, and it led to us moving forward with niching down. And that was one of the best decisions that we've ever made. And the pros of niching down and kind of becoming hyper-focused outweighed the cons of this kind of global pandemic. So I obviously say this with a grain of salt, meaning there's only so much you can do if you're a restaurant owner and you can't serve. So this, advice is applicable to, people who are more similarly in my spot or my position. But it was a huge change for us. But the biggest learning point for me was nowadays, okay, the COVID pandemic, fingers crossed, is kind of maybe slowing down a little bit. But now we've learned to ask ourselves those big pivot questions on a quarterly basis. If there's not a pandemic, or if there is, we've just learned that that's an important conversation to have. And I think when all is well, especially for startups, even if your growth is where you think it should be, you should still have that hard conversation. And so now as founders and even as leaders in our team, we ask ourselves, hey, pandemic hits, what are we going to do? Let's pretend like another COVID-20 comes next month, God forbid. What are we going to do to pivot again? What's the next pivot about? And so that's really kept us on our toes. And that's what's allowed us to continue to scale even through this process. So.
Very, very, very cool, man. Losing a third of revenue, that's appreciable. It's significant. Certainly there were a lot of businesses that lost that. There were a lot that lost more, and there were a lot that lost less, like our business. We were very mildly affected by by the pandemic. And the reality is actually that the one client that we lost early on in the pandemic was a marketing firm. And they were a marketing firm who had niched, but they had niched in hospitality. And so their market had pretty much dried up overnight. And they went from, a pretty, good sized organization to relatively nothing overnight. And we were one of those fortunate industries that wasn't, heavily impacted. Now, there are companies in our sector that were impacted, but a lot of us weren't, heavily impacted. So it's interesting to hear your story, and see that despite losing a third of your revenue, here a little over a year later, you are still growing and growing at a more appreciable pace than even before. So maybe, and I guess actually before I go to that next, question, just to highlight, you talked about niching down or picking a niche, really narrowing your market segment. And this is a concept that really, in most any industry circles and best practices groups and masterminds or whatever, it's a concept that's commonly talked about. And for lots of entrepreneurs, it seems counterintuitive. It seems that if I niche, I'm going to narrow my addressable market segment. And therefore I am, potentially losing revenue that I would get from other industry segments that I'm going to choose to not do business with. Or maybe it's not industry segments, because you can niche as you have based upon strengths, right?
Yeah.
But it's funny and interesting how generally niching turns out to be a more productive model for any business. You become the industry expert, for a given set of products or services or a given industry, you become the go-to. You become that trusted, leader, the trusted advisor in the industry, and generally it leads to more opportunity for you. Has that been the case for you, and is that kind of how you've experienced significant growth over the last year?
Yeah, I think you've touched on a couple important things that people tend to overlook when they hear or they start listening to this conversation about niching down, and that is a lot of people tend to go straight to niching down via the industries that they target. For some reason, that's like the first way people start thinking about it, but that's not what we did, right? We niche down in the services that we offer, what we do, right? The value that we add. We're relatively speaking still industry agnostic, and I think a different way to really focus on it is, especially for startups, right? You have to be efficient as a startup, and for all businesses, but particularly as a startup, you're not going to survive long. And in order to be efficient, then for me, one of the definitions of efficiency is just really making sure you're not wasting away any of your resources, your value, your manpower, et cetera, et cetera. So you have to be hyper focused either on what you offer or who you're targeting. In fact, for us, when this conversation kind of started, when COVID hit, the Pareto principle was kind of the core of what we were discussing. And for those who are not aware, the Pareto principle, I really invite everyone to go kind of Google. It's fascinating. It's this 80-20 kind of universal rule where, bizarrely enough, in so many different areas of life and the universe and economics, 80% of something is directly related to 20% of its consequences, and vice versa. So for example, 20% of your employees are responsible for approximately 80% of the production. And maybe 80% of your headaches are a cause of 20% of your clients. Or 20% of the world's population is responsible for 80% of its wealth. We see this kind of universal 80-20 principle in a lot of places. And I think Pareto, he's an Italian guy. Again, fact check me on this. He's an Italian gentleman, and he started with this principle because he noticed that 80% of Italy's land was owned or occupied by 20% of the population. So, but it started this very interesting discussion. And for us, when we were niching down, we said, well, let's look at that. Let's see where 80% of our revenue actually comes from. Let's see where 80% of our production or value comes from. Let's see what 80% of our reviews tend to list. 80% of our reviews tend to list 20% of our services, and that was branding and building for us. So it was like just this big light that just went off and confirmed to us with cold hard data that yeah, there's value here, and we can cut away this fat and focus on the 20% because it's giving us 80% of the value. So I think if, especially entrepreneurs, solopreneurs, small business owners, if they just did that exercise even once a year, I think some enlightening information might come forth. So
yeah, so smart, man. Really it is. And I love the fact that you were so mindful about how you approach the situation. When crisis hits, oftentimes, the first thing we all do is to panic. And you often don't, you just start making bad decisions. You start, throwing spaghetti against the wall. And I love that you were so mindful about the approach to really kind of dig into it and think about, okay, where is our value really coming from? Where is our revenue really coming from? You think about niching, and for example, in today's market, you go to either restaurant chains that are that are growing really rapidly, or you go to highly successful high-end restaurants, and you'll notice that their menus are drastically simplified. You go to a really nice, you go out for date night with your wife, to a really nice place, and there might be 4 to maybe 6 main dishes available right on the menu. And honestly, it's part of this same principle of niching, of really understanding, as you've expressed, what are we really good at, and where do we really, add value to our clients. And if we can really focus on those things and simplify and nail the operations on those, we decreased our cost of doing business significantly. We're able to, increase our margins, which either can make us more competitive or obviously give us an opportunity to reinvest in the business, significantly, So, and I'll be honest, I mean, this concept of niching has not been easy for me, in my business over 22 years. I would say that, as you have, we've niched more on product and service delivery than we have we do focus most definitely on highly regulated industries, is kind of more of a niche that we focus on. It doesn't mean that we don't have clients or that we don't accept clients that are outside of, the industries that generally fit really well within our programs.
Yeah.
But it's not always an easy proposition, and it's not always something you can just simply do overnight. It's, oftentimes a process, and you're refining, that whole process as you're going, figuring out and reanalyzing the data. I really love the fact that you looked at data, and that you were, you weren't just throwing spaghetti at the wall, but you were like very intentional about what you were doing. Yeah. Not always easy to do that, again, particularly in moments of crisis, right? So, by the way, just out of curiosity, I mean, you mentioned you're pretty industry agnostic at this point. Is there a certain size of company or type of company that generally fits within your wheelhouse?
Yeah, it's grown and changed quite a bit, especially over the last year. It's grown in terms of the size of company that we work with. When we first started, we worked with a lot of startups to mid-cap businesses, local businesses, where now we're working with several what I would call enterprise level clients. So I would say right now, Big Red Jelly tends to focus on more between the mid-cap to enterprise level. When I say mid-cap, I mean, picture a company that's making at least, 5 to 10 million a year and end up from there. So again, it just shows to your point, when you do niche down, it does tend to add credibility and value and emphasis on what you do. You're now a specialist, you're an orthodontic specialist, you're an oral specialist, you're, insert here specialist. It increases value and that allows you to scale probably faster than a generalist would, right? So yeah, that's where we stand currently.
Very, very cool. So you're doing more, really probably more rebranding than you are brand new business kind of branding at this point.
Yeah, correct. Yeah, or there might be a branch of a fairly large, business where we do need to brand from scratch or build from scratch, but a lot of rebranding, a lot of rebuilding. Yeah. So
yeah,
it's fun.
Makes perfect sense. That's cool. So I know there are other kind of processes and things that you and your team have identified that have helped you significantly over the last 12 or 18 months in scaling the business. I know kind of nailing your onboarding, offboarding has been part of that. Tell us maybe a little bit about that and some of the other processes that have really helped accelerate your business.
Yeah. So I am an onboarding evangelist and offboarding. Look, I think it's something that a lot of business owners tend to overlook sometimes, and I think a lot of us can agree it might be the most important stage in any client relationship. And what I like about onboarding is you can apply these principles to any industry. There is a part in a relationship where you have met the customer or client for the first time. What happens there, right? If you're a restaurant, when they are lining up in the queue to order their food, what is happening as soon as they enter the door to where they've paid and now they go sit at their table? What is that process? It's so key. And going back to this kind of Pareto principle, that was for us the impetus to start thinking about this, but in a more micro level. So, again, I challenge business owners to maybe do this kind of audit with all of your processes. And it led us to say, okay, well, we're starting to niche down, we're starting to pivot. Let's do this kind of 80-20 principle at onboarding. And it led to another kind of series of research and audits with our clients saying, out of the onboarding slides that we shared with you on the onboarding call, there was approximately 20% of these that really clicked with the client. 80% were useless, right? And there were 20% of our steps were super crucial. 80% were useless. And there were 20% of the steps that were causing 80% of the past due onboarding projects. So I guarantee if people look at just any phase with that kind of those glasses on, they'll find some inefficiencies. And then at the end of the day, if you're doing this on, let's say a semi-annual basis, you'll end up with almost an unrecognizable process than it was before that's just far superior. So I love onboarding. Going back to that question, I love onboarding because I think it's a chance to really differentiate between your competition early. And, we like to say here, it's kind of that chocolate on the pillow when you book your hotel, right? If any of you have a lot of kids, you've gone through all this trouble to book a hotel, you've spent all this money, it's been a nightmare getting a van to get to the hotel, you open your door, you go into the room, you've gone through all this nightmarish trouble, and then your kids are most excited about the chocolate that's on the pillow or the fancy folded towel that's on the bed in some shape of an animal. So it doesn't take a lot to take that customer experience to just the next level. And so we look for those opportunities in our onboarding and our offboarding. And that can be done in a lot of different ways. So, traditional gifts, things like that, et cetera. But for us, what was most important is always premeditating the, hey, what's next question. If a client ever asks us, hey, where are we at? What's next? What should I expect? Hey, just checking in. Then we've missed something. We've dropped the ball somewhere. So that's been the driver for how we model our onboarding process. Yeah.
That's awesome. You and I are 100% on the same page there. In fact, I tell our team, if the client has to ask, you've lost the battle already. If they ever have to ask, what's the status on this project? What's the status on our onboarding? What's the status on this ticket? What's going on? Why haven't I heard from you? You've created an unsavory experience at that point for the client. They should always know where they're at in the process, why they're there, what the next steps are. I couldn't agree more about how crucial onboarding is. Besides your sales cycle, which is obviously super crucial to make a very important, impression there. Your next opportunity to really create loyal clients is to give them an amazing experience throughout that onboarding process, right? Mm-hmm. And if you aren't mindful about that, it's likely, and look, I know tons of, businesses, including our own, for many years, we didn't understand that principle. We didn't have a documented onboarding process, when we didn't have these specific things we do to try to really kind of engage the client and make them, go, okay, this is unique, this is different. We've made the right decision, right? And you can certainly, if you don't onboard well, you set the tone for a business relationship to potentially be very confrontational, combative, and difficult for the tenure of that relationship, whatever the tenure is. If you give them the right experience up front, you can do the exact opposite of that. And oftentimes, look, we're all people, we're all humans, we're in business. Nobody's perfect. No business is perfect. No human's perfect. Everybody makes a mistake here and there, right? Yeah. But I think that the more positive experiences you have given your clientele, the more likely they are to forgive those little small hiccups that happen, throughout the tenure of a business relationship. You look at, you look at customers who have really done deep work on the customer journey mm-hmm. to really understand that. And, I think about like Apple packaging, mm-hmm. They've really thought about every little piece of, from the time that box comes, how is the box going to be opened? What's the presentation of the product? We want to make this simple and quick and easy. And how does the power adapter connect? And just really, really, gone through a very intricate process there to understand how to make that experience as positive as it possibly can be for the client. And so that's one takeaway definitely I would encourage for any of, you know, the leaders, entrepreneurs, or anybody that's joining us here this hour, is put your own self through your entire customer journey. Like, step into your customer's shoes and think about you yourself walking through that journey. Would it be positive? Would you knock your own socks off? Or would it be mediocre? Would it be negative? You know, I think that when you really kind of consider and you take note, and I try to do this, like when I'm engaging with a new product, a new service, a new vendor, I try to take note of those who have been very intentional about their customer journey and go, okay, you know, these guys really kind of stepped into my shoes. They understand the situation. They've preempted all of the potential, you know, concerns that might come up. They already have the answers. I'm abreast of where things are. I know what's happening. You know, and so that's a definitely very important takeaway that I would recommend here. Just, again, step into your client's shoes, start to finish, from your sales process, from that very first outreach, whether that's you outreaching, you know, you doing outreach or them reaching out to you, all the way through, an offboard, right? All of us have to offboard at some time, right? Hopefully your attrition rates are not, you know, not abysmally high, right? But at some point you're going to offboard, and that's, you know, for me, another thing you got to be thinking about is making that offboarding process positive. Whatever the reason is for the offboard, maybe you made the decision, maybe the client made the decision, but if you can make that a positive experience and not leave an unsavory taste in their mouth, you know, I think at least you deposit some nice, you know, social capital into that social capital bank account that maybe comes back around at some point. Or maybe, you know, this has happened to us before. You know, sometimes the grass looks greener on the other side of the hill, and sometimes maybe somebody steps away for greener grass and they realize, you know what, this grass is brown and it's unsavory. I can't see it. It's gross, you know, and so they want to come back. And so every now and again, you know, those sorts of scenarios happen. But if you make it a very negative experience for, you know, somebody to offboard, I can guarantee, you know, that they're never going to come back around, and probably none of their contacts are ever going to come back around either, right? So important lessons there. I appreciate you sharing those. So what about other sorts of, you know, processes? What other lessons have you guys learned over the last, you know, 18 months or so here, Josh, that have been pivotal for your business?
Yeah, I was going to just diving a little deeper into the onboarding and offboarding. I love that you brought up that kind of a challenge and invitation for people to go through their own onboarding process. Love it. That's something I personally like to do once a quarter. And there's always things that you will find. I guarantee no one will do that and say it's perfect, right? There's that for me, you know, I might go through and, okay, I just had an onboarding video call with someone on my team, and then I just felt like it was too long of radio silence before that first milestone update. And okay, let's tweak that. Let's move that update forward a little bit. Another thing for us that we really dove into was, you know, think about who you're onboarding as well. So for example, we'll work a lot with construction development firms, people that are out there in the field, right? Companies that are in the energy industry. Again, I would say housing companies, construction companies, development companies, et cetera, trucking companies. And they just aren't on email. You know, but we use email, so they must use email, right? But that's just not the case. Like I really don't like, anyone who knows me knows I do not like to text for business. I hate it. I really try to keep those separate. However, I understand that they, or at least, again, I'm painting with a broad brush here, but for the most part, they appreciated text message updates. And so we implemented that into our process, right? Where it's optional, they can opt in, but they just found that far more effective. And guess what? Now we have very few onboardings that are past due for that industry. So not only do you have to look at it from kind of a timeline perspective, that's how I like to look at it first. Let me draw it out on a linear timeline. Let me look at these milestones that need to happen. But now let me look at it from a platform or medium perspective. What tools am I using to communicate the message? Then you go a step deeper and say, okay, well, what's actually being communicated or performed on the onboarding process? So that goes as far as, well, what's the script or the bullet point outline that our designer is going to cover on the onboarding call? And so if you can process these out, in my opinion, what that allows us to do, and we consider ourselves a creative agency. We're a branding and web building agency. But I'm a huge believer in process. And when you really have these processes documented, like you said, it just allows our creatives to spend more time being creative. Quite the contrary, where you're like, well, people are going to push back. There's all these kind of, no, if you really process and document it out, it allows you to focus on what makes you special, which is that human element. And for us, it's being creative in branding and web development and design. So.
No, totally. I mean, in business, there are a lot of things you shouldn't have to put a massive amount of mental power or effort into, right? Mm-hmm. If you can save yourselves and your team that brain damage, and you can focus the time and efforts on, again, on the 20% that produces 80%, right? Yeah. Processes can definitely enable that. And I'm not an evangelist for like overdoing red tape within a business. I'm very much, while we have a lot of process, procedure, and system within our business, we want our clients to have a human interaction, not robotic. We don't want, people following exact scripts. So we have guidelines, we have documented processes, but it's also very much open to personal, artistic interpretation, within some guidelines, like maybe not getting too far out, to where you're deviating from, the intended experience or result in the end, but at least, allowing people to engage with an experience from one human to another without it getting overly robotic.
Yeah.
But 100%, I mean, processes can really honestly make or break businesses. And it's cool to see that you've really been intentional about that. Heck, I mean, I could learn a ton from you. That's not always my strongest suit, honestly. While I'm an engineer, and so my mind can break that stuff down and get really detailed. The problem for me is usually taking the time to really, step through that and document. One of the ways we've solved that challenge in our business actually is we incentivize our team for writing processes. So I pay a $50 bonus, to anybody who writes a process. And the reality is I'm not in, me and my leadership team are not necessarily in the trenches day in and day out. And so while we can observe, what's happening, and oftentimes we have input that's valuable to add into process, really, the people that are executing the work day in and day out, more often than not, have the most valuable input. And, we found within our business, while we were asking people to, hey, document that, write a quick, little success process for it, or whatever, we really didn't get many people engaged, many team members engaged with that until there was an incentive behind it. Once it's like, hey, I can write 4 of these in a month, I can make an extra $200, and then I can take my wife out for a really nice date night or whatever, that's when we started to see more success, and we've built this really good library, over more recent years of, of all of our processes and procedures and documentation and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, very, very important point. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, I like that kind of internal incentive. I think that can be applied in many different ways, but yeah, huge fan. I might have to take a page out of that book. So. Yeah.
Cool. I want to remind the crowd, first of all, thank you for joining us here for this hour. Want to remind you that, Josh and I are open to questions. We've got some comments flowing in here. It looks like my buddy, DJ June, is joining us. Thanks for, shout out to DJ June. Thanks for joining us today, buddy. DJ June is the official DJ of the Utah Jazz and DJ for Hire Extraordinaire. Great guy. And super cool dude. So we're glad he's on here with us today. But any questions you might have for Josh or myself, feel free to throw those out there. So Josh, you're knee deep in the world of, branding and marketing. And this is the world that is so often, for so many of us as entrepreneurs, a total big, huge question mark, in the back of our minds. Like how do you market? What works in marketing? What are the new trends? Because it changes all the time. And obviously, based upon your type of service or product, or whatever it is that you are peddling, right? The marketing mediums and what resonates, with your consumer, whether that be a business or whether it be a personal consumer, those things all change, right? But tell us a little bit about what you see on the horizon. What's coming down the pipeline? What's working right now? What do you recommend?
Yeah, I do think about this question quite a bit, and obviously, a lot of this depends on the size of the business and the industry, but something that I tend to consistently see with all of our clients, big, small, different industries, different roles they play, whether it's a CMO or just a manager, wherever our point of contact is, I tend to see before people start marketing, right, or advertising, those are the hot words, they tend to skip quite a few steps. And those steps are, and we know this internally, but I feel like we just don't really, maybe our actions don't follow. Like, we'll start running ads, we'll start doing SEO, we'll start doing social media, we'll just start marketing or advertising in general. But I think overall, people do tend to skip a lot of the research phase and the branding phase. For example, when I ask a lot of business owners, what are the 3 KPIs or metrics that you're going to use to measure if this future campaign is going to be successful? Shocking to me how many really have not even asked themselves that question, right? And so again, even though because it's not the fun part for a lot of people, it's not fun to, well, let me take a step back and look retroactively and kind of research, what are those KPIs? What is successful for me? How do I and do I have platforms in place to measure if I'm achieving this? So for example, again, that leads to point number 2, which is so many businesses don't have mechanisms or platforms or just a process in place to track what's most important to them. And that's shocking as well, right? So if I'm a restaurant owner and obviously butts and seats or dishes ordered is important to me, then we want to be tracking where these people are coming from. How are we finding out where these people are walking through the door? Where did they find you? It continues to be a surprise to me how many people lack data and information. So that's step and priority number 1 for us. And whenever we do our onboarding, just going back to onboarding, I guess, that's question number 1. What's success for you? Okay, I want more sales. Well, great. That's a popular answer. But what are some other KPIs or key performance indicators that are important for you to track? This, and this. How are you tracking those? Well, we're not. Okay, well, that's a problem. So let's do that before we even think about talking about advertising and branding and marketing. And then that leads us into the second biggest thing for me is just how many businesses haven't taken a step back to kind of refresh and rethink their brand. A lot of people think it's kind of a one phase thing. We do it at the beginning when we were co-founders and we were coming up with our name and who we think we should target, and then they've never revisited it again. And that is not the way that it should be done, right? It's something that it's fluid, it evolves. Case in point, what happened with us when we pivoted and we niched down, we also rebranded. Our tagline changed, our logo changed slightly, our color palette even changed, our messaging changed, the jargon we use changed. And then we get the team on the same page. People really underestimate the power that it means to have a cohesive brand. And if you want to do a quick exercise, about this, if you're a business owner who's listening, go to 5 to 10 of your employees and ask them in, 10 words or less what it is your company does. Write it down. And then at the end of that exercise, see how different those answers are, right? And that might give you an idea of just how different the perspective is of what you do. So those 2 things in particular, measuring what's successful for you, and then revisiting your brand, who you are, why you do, what you offer. Those 2 steps I see a lot of people skipping over into the marketing and advertising right away. So it's interesting.
No, it makes total sense. Again, I think unless you've had a background in marketing or some education in it, for most of us as founders and entrepreneurs and leaders, like, it's not a strong suit, right? And it's easy to kind of forget. But these are the days of data, right? We're in the age of data. We're in the age of making data-driven decisions. And not only in marketing, but in everything that a business does at this point. Operations and sales and finance and procurement and whatever the flavor of what needs to happen in the business in the day is. You can probably figure out ways to make the right decisions, to gather the right data and make the right decisions based upon data. And certainly, as you mentioned, that Pareto principle, thinking about that 80-20 or 20-80, however you need to look at it.
Yeah.
So Mary Kate Nilsson, welcome, by the way, asks a question here. She says, what digital tools do you recommend for small business owners to increase their revenue and improve their process?
Yeah, number one, I think by far, if you are a small business, and particularly if you're a brick and mortar, right? If you have a physical location where your customers should visit, so restaurants, spa owners, attorneys, dentists, chiropractors, you name it. For you in particular, the number one tool I've been a huge fan of, and it's just going to continue to become more and more important. And surprise, right now it's free to use. So when I add all these things together, people are like, well, what is it? Google My Business, right? So your Google listing. Again, very surprising to me. I will continue to pump into mom and pop shops or even bigger businesses that have a physical location, office space, perhaps an event venue, a sports arena, and they do not know what Google My Business is, or they've never logged in. They haven't verified their account. So go to googlemybusiness.com right now, log in, verify your account. Google will mail you a postcard with a little verification code. You can verify that. That's what allows you to manage your Google reviews, manage what displays when people search and find you on Google Maps. It's what displays what's called the Google card off to the right-hand side. If I were to type in Cheesecake Factory, Salt Lake City, off to the right, you're going to see a box, and we've all seen it. Right? It's got images, it's got a map, phone number, website link, reviews, posts. Google is transforming this over the last couple of years, in my opinion, into kind of a social media platform to connect local businesses with local customers. So if you are not using that actively as a small business owner, do it today. You should not be waiting. And guess what? It has an app, so you can manage everything on the go. Huge. And for right now, it's free 90 free. So go and set that up. Yeah.
Very, very good piece of advice. It is striking how often you run across businesses that, some other piece of data has created a listing for them, but they've never gone and managed that. They've never gone and taken control of it and, actually made sure that it fits their brand and the messaging, is what they want out there, right? Yeah. And you're right. I mean, it's more common with smaller, little shops and restaurants and stuff like that. But great piece of advice. Thomas Cook says he sees a Frankenstrat. Thomas, that is actually a local Utah artist's interpretation of a Frankenstrat. It is not an actual Eddie Van Halen, Frankenstrat. If you look at them side by side, there are quite a bit of difference. But a guy out of Logan that actually he did this guitar as well. This is hydro dipped. His name is David Parker. I think he's from Chile originally, if I'm not mistaken. Cool kid. He tears down guitars and he does all sorts of different designs and things. I have 3 or 4 that he's done for me. So this is his that one here. Let's see, there is his interpretation of the Frankenstrat that he did when Eddie passed. And I follow him on Instagram, and I saw him post it and I was like, dude, I want it. That needs to go on my wall. Yeah. So, thank you for noticing the guitar there, Thomas. So we got about 5 minutes left here, Josh. Maybe let's just focus the last 5 minutes on what are some pieces of advice that you haven't shared so far, whether those be entrepreneurship related, leadership, business, marketing, sales. What's something that has been really important to you and your team over the last couple of years that you think would be very helpful to the audience?
I think I could speak specifically to maybe entrepreneurs who are working on a startup, who are kind of in that grind, right, as we like to say, because I'm in that. I'm going through that. I've been through that, and I've learned a few things along the way, both for better and for worse. But for me, I'm just a big believer in, build it and process it out as if it was a large corporation, right? Do that now. One of the books, I listened to the audiobook that really changed my perspective on our startup, Big Red Jelly, about 3 years ago, was the E-Myth. If you've read that book, it was just a great kind of learning experience for an entrepreneur, and especially for me at that phase. So if you have not listened to that, I challenge you to do so. It's focused toward entrepreneurs. It talks about the entrepreneurial seizure that a lot of us have, where we want to get into this world and then we quickly realize just how much work it is. And so maybe read that and then think about your business through that perspective. I like to tell our team often, build it and they will come. So especially for our sales team. So if we have a particular type or size of client that we want to target, we'll start building that service, product, or value that they would enjoy now, and then they will come. Oftentimes we go the other way around, where we say, well, let me start thinking about that. No, focus on yourself and what you need to do, and it will start to bridge that gap. So that's been a huge benefit for me. And then for my agency friends out there, you asked earlier, where do you see kind of the future of marketing and advertising and branding and creative? I think about that quite a bit. I'm trying to stay ahead of the curve. And I do think that advertising, marketing tools, a lot that we see like Facebook ads, Google ads, SEO, that kind of thing, it's going to slowly start to become more commoditized over time, especially as we see younger generations start to fill the business owner role. They've grown up with those tools. And in tandem with that growth, we're also going to see these tools become more and more user-friendly, right? Just look at Facebook ads now compared to when they came out, back in 2010 or 11. Crazy. So I think that companies across the board, specifically in the agency space, should continue to focus on the last two things to be commoditized, if they will ever, and that's creative and strategy. And that goes back to something that you mentioned, which is that human element. Allow people to be people. That's something that's very hard to duplicate, and businesses are going to continue to cherish, and I think pay top dollar for. So make sure that is worked into processes, but you allow enough liberty for your people to be people, right? So
yeah, very, very good advice. Very, very wise words. Thank you, Josh. Thank you. Maybe quickly just coming back around to Mary Kate's question about digital tools. Again, we're in the age of data, so you need to be looking for tools that are going to help you analyze. So I know primarily today we've been talking about branding and marketing. Look at tools that are going to help you analyze your marketing, your campaigns. Certainly, at least Google Analytics or some other analytic platform that's going to help you understand your digital touches, with your audience. We've been migrating, and of course you need a really robust, quality CRM that's going to give you those types of insights and help you, manage your relationships with your clients. We've been migrating our CRM into SharpSpring, which we've really liked the data tools and the visibility, and it actually provides us not just visibility of who hits your website, but when they interact with your social media, when they're interacting with your online and offline content and all that kind of stuff. And so, it's been a really good tool for us, so far. we're new to it. We've used other similar platforms. Infusionsoft, for example, we used in years past. It wasn't quite as capable as SharpSpring is, right now. But anyways, look for tools that are going to help you understand, and 100% you have to know, if you're going to execute a marketing campaign, you need to understand like KPIs and what are the outcomes you want from that, first of all, and then you need to be able to measure the campaign. How many people are you reaching? How many people are engaging? How many leads is that leading to? How many sales is that leading to? What revenue does that lead to? Right? And you need to be able to analyze that data so that you can say, okay, these efforts, this spaghetti I'm throwing against the wall works. The rest of the spaghetti doesn't work, so I don't need to pay attention to that, right? I don't need to mess with it. So Josh, we're at the top of the hour. This has been fantastic. I've really enjoyed the conversation. I want to thank you for being my guest. I want to thank you for all of your advice, your wise words, for sharing abundantly with the community and the audience here. We want to thank everybody who's joined us over the last hour. So that's it for today. Josh and I thank you. Go follow Josh and myself on on LinkedIn. I know Josh is very active on Instagram. I am a little bit. But Instagram, Facebook, wherever you want to hit us up at, Twitter if you do that, and we're happy to answer any questions you might have outside of here. So thank you, everybody. We're going to sign off. Have a wonderful afternoon.
Awesome. Thanks, Earl. Thanks, everyone.
Bye bye.